Jackson Reed had always believed that the most dangerous part of being a maintenance engineer on Stellar Station Alpha was the risk of electrocution. After 6 years of keeping the massive space station's systems running, he developed an almost supernatural awareness of failing circuits and faltering generators. What he hadn't counted on was the hazards of Etherian diplomatic protocol. The day everything changed started with a simple work order: repair the environmental controls in the diplomatic wing's conference room before the afternoon's negotiations. Jackson whistled as he made his way through the pristine corridors, tool belt clicking against his standard-issue gray jumpsuit. The station's artificial gravity felt slightly off, another item on his endless to-do list. Better get this done before the bigwigs arrive, he muttered, accessing the maintenance panel behind an ornate wall hanging. The environmental system's diagnostic display showed multiple cascade failures. Jackson sighed and got to work. He was elbow-deep in circuitry when the door whispered open. Soft footsteps approached, accompanied by the subtle chime of ceremonial jewelry. Jackson remained focused on the delicate repair, assuming it was one of the regular diplomatic staff. "The atmosphere feels unstable," a melodious voice observed. "I trust this is being addressed." "Yes, Ambassador," Jackson replied automatically, not looking up from his work. "Just need to bypass this faulty dash." His hand slipped on a loose connection, causing him to stumble backward. As he tried to regain his balance, his shoulder brushed against someone, standing behind him. The touch lasted less than a second. Jackson spun around, apology ready on his lips, and froze. Before him stood Ambassador Nira Voss of the Etherian Empire, her crystalline skin shifting through shades of deep blue to startled violet. Her luminescent eyes widened in shock. Two guards materialized seemingly from nowhere, their weapons trained on Jackson's chest. The ambassador raised one elegant hand, and everyone in the room went still. "Do you know what you have done?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. Jackson swallowed hard. "I apologize for the contact, Ambassador. It was completely accidental." "Accident or intent matters not under Etherian law," she said. "Physical contact with an unmarried member of the imperial bloodline can only be interpreted in one of two ways: an act of aggression punishable by death, or—" She paused, her crystalline features unreadable. "Or," Jackson prompted, trying to keep his voice steady. "Or a formal declaration of intent to mate." Jackson blinked. Surely he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Our laws are absolute," Ambassador Voss continued. "You must choose, face execution for assault, or submit yourself as a potential mate under imperial law." The guard's weapons hummed ominously. Jackson's mind raced through his options. Death was obviously out. But becoming ceremonially engaged to an alien ambassador because of a workplace accident seemed equally impossible. How? He cleared his throat. How exactly would this mate selection process work? Something flickered in the ambassador's luminescent eyes, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "You would undergo the traditional trials. If you fail, the result is the same as choosing execution. If you succeed—" She lifted her chin. "We would be bound together under imperial law." Jackson ran a hand through his dark hair, buying time to think. His mother had always told him his habit of fixing things would get him into trouble someday. She probably hadn't imagined this scenario. "Before I choose," he said carefully, "may I ask one question?" Ambassador Voss inclined her head slightly. "The environmental controls in this room are still malfunctioning. If I'm executed, who's going to fix them before your negotiations this afternoon?" For a moment, no one moved. Then, to everyone's surprise, Ambassador Voss laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a crystal garden. "You face death or an unwanted political marriage," she said, "and you worry about completing your maintenance duties." Jackson shrugged. "It's my job. Someone has to keep things running." The ambassador studied him with new interest, her skin shifting to a softer shade of blue. "Perhaps," she said finally, there is more to humans than we have previously believed. She turned to her guards. Lower your weapons. I accept his implicit choice to undergo the trials. I haven't actually agreed to dash, Jackson began. Would you prefer execution? He sighed. No, Ambassador. I would not. Then you will present yourself at my quarters at 20th hour. We will discuss the trials. She moved toward the door, then paused. And Engineer Reed? Yes, Ambassador. Do finish fixing the environmental controls first. As the ambassador and her guards departed, Jackson turned back to the open panel, trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 5 minutes, he'd gone from routine maintenance to potential Imperial consort, or corpse. He reconnected the bypassed circuit, watching the diagnostic display return to normal levels. At least he could still fix machines. People, and apparently politics, were far more complicated. Well, he muttered to himself, closing the panel, Mom always did say I should aim for a more impressive job title. Somehow, he didn't think she'd had Imperial consort in mind. The repaired environmental system hummed contentedly, unaware that it had just played a part in altering the course of human-Etherian relations forever. Jackson checked his chronometer, 6 hours until he had to face whatever these trials might be. He should probably clean up first. It wouldn't do to meet his potential future mate covered in machine oil and cooling fluid. Though given how this day was going, that might somehow violate another obscure alien law. One thing was certain, routine maintenance would never be the same again. Jackson stood outside Ambassador Voss's quarters at precisely 20th hour, having traded his work-stained jumpsuit for his best civilian clothes, a dark blue shirt and black pants that he usually reserved for station formal events. He'd spent the last few hours researching Etherian customs, though most information was classified or written in their complex crystalline script. The door slid open silently. The ambassador's quarters were easily triple the size of his maintenance cubicle, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the nearby nebula. Ambassador Voss stood by these windows, her crystalline form refracting the cosmic light into subtle patterns across the floor. You're punctual, she observed, turning to face him. And you cleaned up. I figured showing up covered in coolant might not make the best impression. Jackson stayed near the door, unsure of protocol. Though honestly, Ambassador, I'm not sure what would. Nira. Pardon? If you're to be my potential mate, you should use my given name. Her skin shifted to a lighter blue. Unless you'd prefer to maintain formal titles before your execution. Jackson couldn't tell if she was joking. Nira, then. I'm Jackson. Yes, I reviewed your file. She gestured to a sitting area. Please, be seated. We have much to discuss. The furniture looked like it was carved from living crystal but proved surprisingly comfortable. Nira settled across from him, her movements graceful and measured. The trials, she began, are designed to test 3 essential qualities: adaptability, understanding, and devotion. They date back to the founding of our empire. And if I fail any of them, then you die. She stated it matter-of-factly. However, there is something you should know. Her skin darkened slightly. No non-Etherian has ever passed them. Wonderful. Jackson leaned back. Any other encouraging news? Several members of the Imperial Council are already protesting your participation. They believe allowing a human maintenance worker to attempt the trials degrades their sanctity. Because fixing things is beneath them. Nira's eyes narrowed. You misunderstand. In our culture, those who maintain and repair are highly respected. However. She paused. Your species is considered young. Impulsive. Some would say primitive. Says the species that executes people for accidental touching. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Nira's skin flashed a dangerous deep purple, and Jackson braced for guards to burst in. Instead, she did something unexpected. she laughed. You speak your mind freely, she said. That is, refreshing. My people tend toward excessive ceremony. I noticed. Jackson gestured to the room's elaborate decor. Though I have to admit, your technology is beautiful. The way you've integrated crystalline matrices into basic systems is incredible. I've been studying the designs since I started working here. Nira's color shifted to a curious pale blue. You understand our technology? Parts of it. Enough to maintain the hybrid systems on the station. Your environmental controls are particularly elegant, the way they adjust not just temperature and atmosphere, but subtle energy fields to match Etherian biology. Most humans simply see pretty lights and shapes. Most humans don't spend their days keeping the station running. Jackson shrugged. Beauty and function aren't mutually exclusive. Look at your skin, it's not just aesthetically stunning, it's a complex biochemical communication system. Nira's skin rippled with unexpected patterns. You find my appearance stunning? Jackson felt his face warm. I meant from an engineering perspective. The way your crystalline structure refracts light while maintaining cellular flexibility is. I should stop talking. No, she said softly. Please continue. Your perspective is unique. For the next hour, they discussed the integration of human and Etherian technologies on the station. Jackson found himself sketching potential improvements on a data pad while Nira offered insights into her people's engineering philosophy. The formal atmosphere gradually relaxed. You are not what I expected, Nira admitted finally. A bumbling maintenance worker who'd get himself executed by breaking cultural taboos. Someone who sees beyond surface beauty to understand the underlying principles. Her skin had settled into a calm azure. Perhaps that will serve you well in the trials. About those. Jackson set aside the data pad. When do they begin? The first trial starts tomorrow at dawn. She rose gracefully. You should rest. Any hints about what I should prepare for? It would be against protocol to tell you. But her skin flickered briefly with a pattern he'd never seen before. Though perhaps you should remember our discussion about environmental controls. Jackson stood, reading between the lines. Thank you, Nira. For what? I've told you nothing. But there was a hint of something in her luminescent eyes, concern. Jackson, the trials are dangerous. You could still choose exile instead. And leave the station's systems in less capable hands. Not a chance. He moved toward the door, then paused. Besides, I'm curious to see what other surprises your culture has in store. Let us hope that curiosity does not prove fatal. Her tone was serious, but her skin rippled with that same unusual pattern. As Jackson walked back to his quarters, his mind raced with possibilities. He had a feeling he'd just experienced his first trial, an unofficial one. Nira had been testing him, gauging his reactions and understanding. He'd passed this unofficial trial, but tomorrow would bring official challenges. At least he had a hint about the first one. Environmental controls. He could work with that. As he drifted off to sleep that night, Jackson's dreams were filled with crystalline patterns and luminescent eyes. Tomorrow would either kill him or change his life forever. Somehow, both options seemed equally terrifying and exciting. The station's night cycle hummed around him, systems he knew intimately continuing their eternal dance of maintenance and repair. Tomorrow, he would need to prove himself worthy of more than just fixing machines. Tomorrow, he would begin to bridge the gap between two vastly different cultures, or die trying. At least he'd fixed those environmental controls first. Dawn on a space station was a relative concept, but Jackson's comm unit chimed precisely at station dawn. A message glowed on the screen, proceed to environmental testing chamber 7. First trial begins in 1 hour. He arrived at the chamber with 15 minutes to spare, wearing his work jumpsuit despite the protocol officer's horrified suggestion that he dress more formally. If this trial involved environmental systems as Nira had hinted, he wanted to be prepared. The chamber door slid open to reveal a vast circular room. Dozens of Etherian dignitaries sat in elevated observation seats, their crystalline forms creating a shimmering amphitheater. Nira stood on a raised platform, wearing ceremonial robes that made her seem to float. "Jackson Reed," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of official protocol. "You face the trial of adaptation. Do you accept the challenge?" "I do." The words echoed in the chamber. "Then behold your task." She gestured, and the chamber's center transformed. A shimming barrier appeared, enclosing a space about 20 feet in diameter. Inside, a young Etherian child materialized, or rather, Jackson realized, a very sophisticated hologram of one. "This simulation represents a child of the Imperial bloodline," Nira explained. "The environmental barrier has malfunctioned, trapping them in conditions that will prove fatal within 30 minutes. You must restore proper Etherian environmental conditions before time expires." Jackson studied the barrier. "What happens if I fail?" "The child dies." Nira's skin darkened. "As will you." A murmur ran through the watching dignitaries. Jackson heard snippets of their whispered conversations, "Impossible for a human, and doesn't even understand our basic principles." "The trial begins now," Nira announced. A countdown appeared in the air, 30:00. Jackson approached the barrier, examining its structure. The holographic child inside was already showing signs of distress, their crystalline form dulling. He could see the environmental control panel, but its interface was entirely in Etherian script. "Think," he muttered. "What did you learn about their systems?" He'd spent years maintaining the station's hybrid human-Etherian technology. The basic principles had to be similar. The child's deteriorating condition provided clues about what was wrong: temperature, pressure, energy fields, atmospheric composition. 25 minutes left. Jackson accessed the panel, recognizing patterns in the crystalline script from his maintenance work. The system was more complex than the station's controls, but the underlying logic was familiar. "Okay, first priority, stabilize the atmospheric mix." His fingers flew over the controls, adjusting levels. The child's distress eased slightly, but their form continued to dull. 20 minutes. He traced power conduits with his eyes, spotting the problem. The energy field matrix is inverted. It's draining the child's natural crystalline resonance instead of supporting it. Whispers from the audience suggested he was on the right track. But fixing it wouldn't be simple. A direct reversal could shatter the barrier and kill everyone in the chamber. 15 minutes. Jackson closed his eyes, visualizing the system as a whole. What had Nira said during their discussion? Beauty and function intertwined. The Etherian way wasn't to force changes, but to guide energy into natural patterns. His fingers began moving across the controls, not fighting the inverted matrix but gradually shifting it, creating harmonics that would naturally resolve into the correct configuration. Like tuning a massive crystalline instrument. 10 minutes. The barrier hummed, its frequency changing. The child's form brightened slightly. Jackson continued his adjustments, each change building on the last, creating a cascade of resonating energies. 5 minutes. With a sound like wind through crystal, the barrier's energy field suddenly snapped into proper alignment. The child's form immediately brightened, their distress vanishing. The countdown froze at 4:47. Silence filled the chamber. "Trial complete," Nira announced. Was there a hint of relief in her voice? "The candidate has succeeded." The dignitaries erupted in shocked discussions. Jackson sagged against the control panel, exhausted but relieved. He'd passed the first trial. "An interesting approach," Nira said, approaching him after the chamber had cleared. Her skin rippled with complex patterns. "Most would have attempted to force the system into compliance." "That's not how your technology works," Jackson replied. It's about harmony, not control. Like your people. You understand more than you reveal. She studied him with those luminescent eyes. Though appearing for a formal trial in work clothes. Hey, they worked, didn't they? He grinned. Besides, I had a feeling this trial would be hands-on. The next will not be so technical. Her skin darkened slightly. You will face the trial of understanding tomorrow. It will test more than your mechanical aptitude. Any hints this time? Only this, not all adaptation is physical. She turned to leave, then paused. Jackson, you did well today. The child simulation was based on my younger sister. The personal admission surprised him. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for saving her. Even if only in simulation. Her skin rippled with that now familiar pattern he was beginning to suspect meant approval. Rest well. You will need your strength tomorrow. As Jackson walked back to his quarters, news of his success spread through the station. He received respectful nods from Etherians who had previously ignored him. A few humans stopped him to ask if the rumors were true, was he really attempting the Imperial trials? But his mind was on tomorrow's challenge. The trial of understanding. Not all adaptation is physical. What did that mean? More importantly, why did the way Nira's skin rippled when she looked at him seem more significant than any test? He had survived the first trial, but something told him the real challenges were just beginning. Technical problems had solutions. Cultural and personal ones, those were far more complex. At least he had his work clothes cleaned for tomorrow. Whatever the trial of understanding brought, he would face it as himself, a human who fixed things, whether they were machines or, apparently, diplomatic incidents. The station hummed around him, human and Etherian systems working in harmony. Tomorrow would test his understanding of more than just technology. But for now, he had survived, succeeded, and maybe even impressed a crystalline ambassador. Not bad for a maintenance engineer. The summons for the second trial came not at dawn, but at dusk. Jackson found himself led not to another technical chamber, but to what appeared to be a traditional Etherian meditation garden. The room's artificial gravity was slightly lighter than standard, allowing crystal formations to float and spin in mesmerizing patterns. Nira waited alone, without the crowd of dignitaries from the first trial. Her ceremonial robes were replaced by simpler attire that seemed to flow like liquid crystal. The trial of understanding, she said without preamble, is considered more challenging than the first. Many who master our technology fail here. Because it's not about machines. Because it requires seeing beyond yourself. She gestured to the garden. Tell me what you observe. Jackson studied the floating crystals. They're beautiful, but there's more to it. The patterns aren't random, they're responding to each other, creating harmonies like the environmental systems yesterday. And they're responding to us too. The patterns changed when I entered the room. He watched a cluster of crystals shift. They're especially reactive to you. Because you're Etherian. Your crystalline biology resonates with them. He paused. Like the child in yesterday's trial. Nira's skin rippled with approval. You see the connections. Good. That is the beginning of understanding. She moved closer to one of the larger crystal formations. But seeing is not enough. For this trial, you must do more than observe. You must participate. How? Our children learn to dance with the crystals before they learn to walk. It is not merely movement, but a communion of energies. Her form began to glow softly. You must join the dance. Jackson stared at her. I'm not exactly built for crystal communion. No, she agreed. You are not. That is why this trial exists, to prove whether you can transcend your biological limitations and truly understand our ways. The floating crystals began moving more purposefully, creating complex orbital patterns around them. Neera's form shifted through shades of blue and violet as she merged with their dance. I don't know how to do this, Jackson admitted. You understand our technology because you learned to think in harmonies rather than forces, she said, her voice taking on a musical quality. Apply that same principle here. Feel the resonance. Jackson closed his eyes, trying to sense the energy patterns as he had with the environmental systems. There was something there, subtle vibrations, wavelengths of light and sound just at the edge of human perception. The crystals respond to thought and emotion as much as physical movement, Neera continued. Show them your intent. Jackson remembered how the systems responded to gradual guidance rather than force. He focused on the subtle energies, imagining himself as part of their flow rather than trying to control them. A small crystal cluster drifted closer to him. Good, Neera encouraged. Now move with them, not against them. Jackson began to sway slightly, matching the crystal's natural rhythm. More formations joined the dance, creating expanding spirals of light and energy. He felt oddly weightless, connected to something vast and ancient. The dance, Neera said softly, is how we share memories and emotions. Open yourself to it. Suddenly, Jackson wasn't just seeing the patterns, he was feeling them. Impressions and memories washed over him, a young Neera learning these same movements, the weight of tradition and duty, the loneliness of protocol and position. Oh, he breathed, understanding flooding through him. This isn't just a dance. It's your language. Yes. Neera's skin shifted through complex patterns. Every ripple, every color change, every crystal resonance carries meaning. What humans dismiss as pretty lights is our deepest form of communication. The crystals swirled faster, and Jackson felt himself drawn deeper into their dance. He saw more memories, Neera's frustration with rigid traditions, her secret fascination with human adaptability, her fear when he had touched her, and something else, something she was trying to hide. Enough. She pulled back abruptly, the crystals scattering. Her skin had darkened to deep purple. I'm sorry, Jackson said quickly. I didn't mean to. No, she cut him off. You succeeded. Perhaps too well. She turned away, composing herself. You have passed the trial of understanding. Few non-Etherians have ever managed to join the crystal dance, let alone perceive its deeper meanings. Neera. He stepped toward her, then stopped, remembering the taboo against touching. What I saw is not relevant to the trial. Her voice was formal again, but her skin betrayed complex emotions. You have proven you can understand our ways. That is sufficient. But Jackson had seen enough to know better. In that moment of connection, he had felt her conflict, duty versus desire, tradition versus change. And something more personal, something that made his heart race. The final trial, she said briskly, will take place tomorrow at midnight. The trial of devotion. Her skin rippled with that pattern he now understood meant concern. It is the most dangerous. Because it tests more than understanding. Because it tests the heart. She moved toward the door. Rest well, Jackson Reed. Tomorrow will demand everything from you. As she left, the crystal garden continued its eternal dance, but Jackson stood still, processing what he had experienced. He had glimpsed something profound, not just about Etherian culture, but about Neera herself. The growing attraction between them wasn't just physical or intellectual. In the crystal dance, he had felt her loneliness, her desire for something beyond rigid protocol. And she had felt his genuine fascination with her people's ways, his desire to bridge their differences. The trial of understanding had revealed far more than either of them had expected. Tomorrow's trial of devotion would test not just his dedication to Etherian ways, but the deeper connection forming between them. The floating crystals pulsed softly, echoing with lingering emotions. Jackson watched them dance, understanding now that they reflected the complex harmonies of the heart as much as any physical law. He had passed the second trial, but victory felt bittersweet. Understanding, he realized, sometimes brought pain along with insight. Tomorrow would test not just his devotion to an ideal, but to the person Neera was beneath her crystalline exterior. The real question was, would she let herself be understood in return?